Good afternoon, everybody, and today I'm speaking to Bill Etheridge, former member of the European Parliament for the West Midlands and the UK Independence Party spokesperson for defence. He's currently Chief Executive of Etheridge Consulting, and he's just published an autobiography with us, A Rhino Through the Looking Glass. It's a fun and frank look at the life of a working-class man who found himself in politics and the unexpected journey that led him to be part of recent tumultuous events. All of this is relayed in with brutal honesty, sparing nobody's blushes, particularly not the authors. After reading this book, one and I most certainly will have learned, what it's like to be caught up in the madness of these times. But more importantly, I hope an insight is given into the human emotions involved, the overwhelming highs of victory and the crushing lows when it all goes wrong. It's a rags and riches, recklessness, tribulations, travails, and the ultimate redemption story. This shows that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. If you're looking for a serious political book, like the likes of Alan Clark or Harold Nicholson, you may take a little from what Bill has written. If you're looking for an honest exposure of joy, laughter, and tears and total confusion felt by human beings in the real world caught up in the madness of politics and life, we hope that whatever your views are, you will enjoy the ride never be tempted to utter the phrase, all politicians are the same, ever again. Good afternoon, Bill.
Good afternoon. I think that's a very fair thing to say. I don't think anyone will think all politicians are the same again after reading this.
Absolutely. And there tends to be this, of course, this whole project when it comes to thinking about legacies, thinking about the wider policy or political questions. But really, after reading this, my own experience is that it's very much a personal book and it's very much a personal story. It's really an adage tribute to your own life, to your own upbringing, and your own experiences and political mentors, mentors in life and in politics. And I think that's really important to realize that politicians are humans too. So
yeah, I think that so many people, and myself included, we see politicians on TV giving standard answers and coming across a bit fake and plastic. But I think the book will show you what happens if you actually try and, as a politician, if you actually try and say from the heart and speak from the truth, you can see the problems that befall you, and also shows how it's not all smooth sailing, even though it might appear that politicians look like they're very comfortable in life. Well, certainly not if you're in an insurgent party. Life is never easy.
Absolutely. And a little bit of this will be about your time in UKIP, your time in the Brexit Party, and your time previously as a candidate with the Conservative Party. And it's been a very varied and storied career, may I say. And it's quite amazing seeing your journey in Brussels and your experience there. So just to start off, you spoke a little bit about your background, be it from the pursuit of women to your time in school. So how did this influence your views when you later went on into politics?
Well, in a couple of ways, really. My dad was a manager in manufacturing businesses and an account supervisor, director, if you will, in those kind of companies as I was growing up. That doesn't mean he was wealthy. He was working two jobs and studying for more qualifications at the same time. But that was during the 70s and the industrial problems of the 70s, where he had to face rampant trade union mobs and be accused of a bourgeois tool of the capitalists and all the rest of it, when he was a working class man struggling to keep his head above water. And we saw what it was like when he came home after all that. So I formed a view at that time, even as growing up, that I didn't feel that all working class people had to belong to the left. And then the rest of it, you talk about womanizing and the rest of the behavior. Well, I'd class myself as, and it's probably old-fashioned, we're an old-fashioned red-blooded male who likes football, cricket, women, beer. It didn't seem to be so controversial when I was a young man. That seemed to be kind of the norm. And I'd be the first to accept I'm possibly a bit of a dinosaur and things have moved on and everyone's a little bit more politically correct nowadays. But, I am what I am. And I try to put that across in the book that, you can't change who you are. And, I like those things in life. I like sport. I like having a good time and I like women. And I don't have any shame about that. And I think a lot of people should be more honest and just say what it is that motivates you in life, what it is you enjoy, because that gives an insight as to who you are.
Agreed. And I think if you want to think about what a lot of ordinary people, what your everyday man on the street, man or woman on the streets views are about their loves, wishes, and aspirations, it's very different today and what it was in the past. And I'm sure there are tons of socioeconomic factors that academics can troll through, but it's very interesting seeing a very perhaps something that a lot of your viewers may be able to relate to, and something maybe it's good that people finally recognize that a lot of those aspirations are valid today, remain valid, and remain strong going in many, many communities, even though sometimes it does seem like that's forgotten, like love of sport or love of the opposite sex or etc. Tends to be
Well,
forgotten at times.
But where I was brought up and where I live now, working class Wolverhampton, and a lot of my time as well in Dudley and other parts of the Black Country, my behaviour would have been classed as, a bit of a lad, but not really anything out of the, not anything particularly bizarre. And the point is, all right, it might be an unreconstructed, old-fashioned kind of male, but we still exist. We haven't been wiped out just yet. And and I think hopefully in the book it shows that that the kind of behaviour isn't necessarily meant with any malice or intent to harm or offend anyone. But I can honestly say that without those things, without having a good time, without sport and without ladies, probably for me, life just wouldn't have been worth living, because those are the things that, and it's a really old-fashioned kind of view, and I get it, and I know speaking to a young man like yourself, you're probably looking at me thinking this is like something out of a museum, but no, that's how it was for people who were born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s. We were, by and large, I wasn't particularly unusual. It's just perhaps I came to a little more prominence and got exposed for what I was doing more than most people. That's all.
I think, if I'm to be honest, a lot of my generation, they're not too dissimilar. If I'm to be honest, they're not too dissimilar
I'm
these days.
very pleased to hear it.
It's just not spoken about, or there's not as much public exposure or discussion of love of sport, of a lot of these different a lot of these different passions that you don't hear about on telly the same way you used to understand it. It's not as well represented.
It feels to me like we've almost gone back to a more puritanical age. It feels
Yeah,
to me like when I look back when I was growing up at the 1950s, and it was very prim and proper. And then I look at the age we live in now, and it feels a little bit to me like we've gone back to that kind of very prim and proper and correct approach towards public life, at least, that we used to have then. And I just don't think it's authentic. You won't get real people involved in public life if you expect them to behave as robots. We've all got things that drive us.
great. So I guess moving on to your wider sort of political career. So what brought you into politics first?
Well, that was almost by accident, really. I'd always had an interest in it, as I say, from the 70s, when I
Hmm.
sort of at first hand on the front line of the battle against rampant socialism and trade unions. I was aware of it. I had a great history teacher when I was at school, Chris Withy, great guy, who was a real Marxist. And he looked like Jeremy Corbyn, and he was a brilliant guy. But he used to talk about history, and we would discuss it. And he would encourage open debate and discussion. So that really got me fascinated in politics and modern history. And then it all went away for a while because I worked in the steel industry, and it was busy times, and it was work hard, play hard, as the book will show. A lot of really crazy antics, but a lot of hard work as well. And then I lost my job after 20 years of just being able to move from one company to another, never having a gap. I lost my job in Gordon Brown's recession, and couldn't get another one. I thought, well, I've got to do something. I was literally pulling my. I had some hair then. I was pulling it out. I couldn't cope with just sitting around. So I went out first of all and did some help with voluntary work with a local church that was trying to get restored. And then I thought, well, very interested in politics. I'll volunteer for the local Tories and take some leaflets out for them. And it developed and grew from there to the point where the Tories took me on as a paid campaign executive and taught me very well, to be fair to them. It's a good education in how to campaign on local issues and how to run a political campaign, and it grew from there.
Oh, that's quite amazing. Where these days you hear about political careers coming from very often professional backgrounds, very often people who are parachuted in, um, and that's a very very different story to someone who really hone their campaigning skills. Um, and interestingly enough, from losing your job in Gordon Brown's recession, to actually being a member of the European Parliament, challenging a lot of the old New Labour consensus and being the forefront of, as it were, the deconstruction of a
Mhm.
lot of what the Blair Brown project was. Well, that process is still ongoing now, but being at the forefront of that deconstruction it's quite amazing how the journey you've been on in the past, well, should I say 20 or so years?
Well, yeah, and the thing is, the people of the area, not all of them, of course, there's never a 100% consensus, but a lot of the people of the areas that I was working in and representing, their views on this Blair Brown consensus were the same as mine. I was articulating in my own forthright way things that were being said to me in a much more forthright manner, I can assure you, on the streets and in the pubs and around the area. And it seems that these views don't seem to be taken into account by anyone. You know, if you're a working class male, for example, who goes and drinks beer in a pub, then your view doesn't count. Well, that's not really fair, I don't think. And it's not just the man side of it. The women were perhaps more strident as well. And the area I come from, just like many other areas, as I later learned when I went around the country, Northwest, for example, very similar. They're ignored. They're classified and written off as a demographic that, wear a flat cap and vote Labour. Well, no, they actually are small c conservative and in some senses libertarian, as much as they really don't like the state telling them what to do and they don't like paying too much tax. They like to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and have a degree of personal pride, and then with their own money do what the hell they want. And that's sort of paraphrasing it, but and bringing it down to a very basic level. And I think I did my best to represent that, because I also believe in it. But I felt an obligation as well because these people, I put a lot of hard work in, but without the people around me backing me up, it would have meant nothing.
And I guess that's the importance of politics these days and what's really been lost, which is personal passion and really having a personal stake. Because a lot of it, talk is one thing, but really being part of the community and really having a stake in the change that you promise is the most important part of really selling who you are, who the party is as a candidate, and saying what you can do for them, or rather what they can expect as a candidate. And I'm sure those.
Absolutely. Even when I was in the European Parliament, I would travel back on weekends or on Thursday nights. A lot of the other people of all parties wouldn't. They'd stay out there. And of course, if you stay out there long enough, you get tax breaks and all sorts of things. But I didn't. I used to come back, and the first thing I'd do, I'd get off the train and I'd go to the local pub. And I'd sit in there and have a few pints, mainly because I've been missing proper beer, but also because, the people would come up to me, they'd recognise who I was, and they'd say, "Oi, Bill, what's going on with this? What's going on with that?" And there's, all these sort of surgeries, as they put it, or these formal meetings don't count for a jot. Actually, what counts for a jot is that people knowing that when they recognise you and see you around the pubs when you come back on the weekend, they come up to you and say, well said, mate, or what the hell are you playing at? You're laying us down. And I've got a good degree of both, but it's useful. It keeps you tied to the ground. You don't end up thinking that you're some kind of, every time you stand up to speak, you're going to emulate Churchill. You know that you've got to still represent where you come from. And I wish more politicians did that, because there's nothing like having the people from your own area speaking bluntly to you to keep you fully grounded.
Agreed, and I think that's an issue that both of the major parties have to deal with now if we're looking at what's happening, where um if we look at a lot of not just wider foreign policy or wider just general issues, if we think about the Israel-Gaza issues that go on in some
Mm.
very Labour predominant constituencies, but also in some conservative constituencies, um It's more of a question of MP engagement and parliamentary engagement with the general public and with their own constituents, because that's what's most important. And
Well, yeah, and it's also, I mean, you talk about Gaza, when you actually still mix with everyday people, you see the subtleties and nuance. Now, for example, I've always, from being at school, always mixed with a very diverse group of people in my area. And a lot of the people, certainly that I played, have always played cricket with and spent time with, they're Muslims. Now, you know, you would expect, if you didn't know any Muslim people in the UK, you would think that this is all very clear cut. There's a load of hateful, monstrous, warlike Muslims hating everything and causing trouble. And that's so easy. It's cheap politics. And you see a lot of that now with people, particularly in parties that I've been involved with, who will just throw everything at smear against one group, particularly Muslims. They're the group of choice at the moment. I can tell you that there's all sorts of shades of opinion. And that a lot of those guys who I know and have known for years who are of the Islamic faith are perfectly good, decent blokes. We have a great time together. They take the mickey out of me. They call me the token white man when we play cricket because I'm the only white man in the team. I've picked up a few foreign insults, so I won't put on your channel, but I know what they are. I also know, how to say, well, come on, Shabazz, Shabazz, when we're playing cricket. And we all join in together and we can all rub along together. We can have different views on certain things, but we can rub along. Now, that shade, that subtlety and nuance, you can't have that if you don't know the people you're talking about. Just the same as not every bloke, white bloke, who says something that might come across as ridiculously over the top and nationalistic or even racist, they're not actually really racist. They're
yeah,
just limited. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but they're limited in their vocabulary and how they're going to put it across. So it can come across, if you put it in the Guardian or something like the Times, it can come across awful. But actually, they're just expressing a passionate view of the moment. They can say that and 2 minutes later be having a drink and a chat with someone of a different ethnicity and not even think twice about it. And those are the subtleties and nuances that are missed by people who don't mix with their fellow man.
and that's I guess it's a subtlety of being in a community where you see what it's really like to be with different people, see what their
Yeah.
views really are, and actually that people are human too, that everyone is three-dimensional and they have their own loves, wants, and needs. And I think moving on to something that you said earlier about your experience going back to England during every week when you were in Brussels, for those 5 years as an MEP. So how was it actually like in the European Parliament?
Well, it was surreal, really. You've got people with uniforms on walking around, basically nodding and almost bowing to you, calling you sir. And you've got chauffeur-driven limos everywhere and fantastic, highly equipped offices. And I've got to say, as places go that I've worked, I mean, it is amazing to work there. It's, they've got it kitted out very well. But it was sealed off from the world. You could spend time there, and there'd be many a time I'd be working there till sort of 8 or 9 o'clock at night because it's all artificial light and everything's closed off. You don't know if it's day or night. You don't mix with any members of the public really, as a general rule, and it's a different, very privileged world, which I must admit, I made full use of, and I enjoyed working there, and I enjoyed the things we did from there. But it doesn't help you understand people or represent people in any way, shape, or form. It's quite, it's almost unimaginable to people who've not been there how high tech and privileged and just different it is to reality. And the people who are there who've been there for several terms, they're living in cloud cuckoo land. They just don't have any knowledge of reality. Because why should they? After a period of time, you become immersed and almost taken over by it. And this applied to UKIP MEPs as well as everyone else. I can see how it would happen. I can see quite easily how it would happen. That was another reason why I made a point of coming back, because you can feel yourself starting to think, I'm rather important. And then you come home and people say, no, you're not, mate. And then it wakes you up to reality. I would recommend, anyone who goes to any parliament or even local councils or these super councils, regional councils now, just make sure you get out of it for a bit and come back and mix with people to realise that you're just another person who happens to have been voted for, who's there to represent other people, not to get carried away and start thinking that you're God's gift.
Agreed, and I think having seen so much of, I did actually have the opportunity to visit the European Parliament once. Unfortunately, I think this was after you'd left the European Parliament. This is, I think, late 2019, and I had the chance to see just the towering buildings and the European Parliament chamber. It was very, very surreal. I agree. It's quite
Yeah,
amazing, and
it is. It's like a palace.
agreed. Yes, and it's everything sorted out for you within doors. Don't even have to leave the building to get anything you want, which
No.
wow. And I guess during your period in the European Parliament, and also as the defense spokesperson for UKIP, how do you feel your role as a French bench spokesperson for UKIP sort of changed your experience as in the European Parliament? Did you have any particular portfolio responsibilities in the chamber or?
Well, when I first went, I wasn't given any responsibilities
Mhm.
at all, because as I've touched upon in the book,
Yes.
Nigel Farage, fantastic politician, achieved wonderful things, was at certain times really good to me, um, but didn't rate someone who was talking with a black country accent and from the working class to be a front bench spokesman. I mean, just, got the wrong tile, boy, just not one of us, you're not appropriate. So I didn't get spokesman or that kind of roles while Nigel was in charge. I was very much the sort of floating backbencher, loyal to the party, but not any particular role. I was briefly defence spokesman when Paul Nuttall took over, who, being a working class scouser, didn't have the same preconceptions. But even then, in terms of the European Parliament, the amount of difference it made to me was limited. All it meant was that when we had a Strasbourg week and anything to do with defence came up, I was allocated a minute to a minute and a half of speaking time, which is, it's hardly anything to sing and shout about. And as the book shows, when I did come up with policies with my team for the elections, based all around defence, and we did a huge amount of research on it, people within UKIP just completely deleted it. So we wasted all of our time. So really, it was a title with no responsibility, really.
Got it. And I guess in your experience in the European Parliament, how was your relationship with other fellow Eurosceptic MEPs from other countries?
Pretty good, actually. I mentioned in the book about a great friend of mine, Peter Lundgren, who's a Sweden Democrat. Fantastic guy. I mean, I'm not small, but he's huge. he's a big personality as well. Likes his food, likes to socialise, but also steadfast and loyal as a friend. And Eurosceptic and portrayed, this is the amazing thing, the Conservatives always portrayed the Sweden Democrats as far-right lunatics until it came to the time when behind the scenes and behind Peter's back, nothing to do with him, they negotiated for the Sweden Democrats to join the same group as them so they could get more time, money, etc., etc. And all of a sudden, they were all right. They weren't far right anymore. They were okay. But Peter, I'm still maintain a friendship with. He's a great guy. Beatrix von Storck of the Alternative for Deutschland, an amazing lady, fantastic grasp of English. She came and did a 45-minute speech in Dudley
Wow.
supporting me in one election. Now, that is someone from London might struggle to get understood in Dudley. so
Oh,
when she's come from Germany, and she came and sat in the local pub with me, drinking pints and chatting to people. Again, portrayed as far-right extremists. Nothing could be further from the truth. The fact is they're Conservatives, perhaps with more of a religious angle to their politics than mine, but they're Conservatives, So some good friends with people like that, and one or two others. And I did, although another Eurosceptic who I wasn't on the same page as politically, I did have some dealings with, and that was Marine Le Pen, who's
Mhm.
quite the lady, very forceful personality. I wouldn't say we were friends, but she occasionally gave me a nod of approval and sent me a Christmas card once, which I'm keeping just in case she's ever president, so I can get myself a free holiday to France. But those other Eurosceptic parties were so diverse in their approach. They ranged from the sort of classic European Christian conservative parties to more libertarian parties to nationalist parties to all, with all shades in between. And they were so quickly written off as being, these sort of barbaric far-right thugs. And they were far from it. And they're also, considering we're all supposed to be xenophobic and hating foreigners, we all got on a treat and had some great times together.
So I think it goes to show that it's very difficult to be xenophobic if you're literally on a train with everyone else from a different country.
Exactly. The whole joke of it. I mean, the one moment that will always stay with me was a member of Marine Le Pen's group came up to me the first time we went to the Parliament after the referendum, and came up to me and gave me a great big hug and said, "Viva la Britannia, viva freedom." Oh wow, this is a moment. And for the only time in my life, I said, "Well, viva la France, but I shall never say that again." But it was the only time in my life, and it was a moment, two hateful far-right xenophobes giving each other a big hug in the middle of the Parliament.
Gosh. There's one section of your book in which you also talk about Roger Helmer, when
Yes,
he was UKIP's economic spokesperson. How would you describe his mentorship with you?
Roger. Roger's a fantastic man. Still to this day, we keep in touch. I met him over a decade ago when he was still a conservative, and he's such a character. He's a little bit like how the sort of caricature of the English bounder at times. A bit of a enjoys his life, rather hedonistic, a very very wonderfully deep voice, and very well spoken, but a kind and generous man who took time out to help me when just the understanding of politics, because he'd been involved for so long where others hadn't. He did, and he's the definition of a real genuine friend who, with massive differences in class, age, you name it, but actually as a man, I would class him as one of my closest friends, and a very dear one, and a trusted one.
Right. And I guess following on from there and just thinking about your early start in UKIP, what first drew you away from the Conservative Party?
Well, I'd been doing something with the campaign against political correctness.
Hmm.
We'd been working together for some time whilst I was in the Conservatives. That was a campaign that was largely, the figurehead was Philip Davis, MP, who is
Hmm.
on GB News and other things now. And I've been doing stuff with them, and most of the public meetings I was holding, because the idea was going to have these public meetings, get people who wouldn't necessarily be Conservatives to come to them with the anti-PC message, get them into the party. But it turned out that virtually everyone who came was a UKIP member or something to do with UKIP. And they kept on at me in my ear all the time. "Oh, you're in the wrong party. You're in the wrong party." Anyway, I dismissed it until we got to a point where during the campaign, we did this thing where everyone was supposed to pose. It was simply to show the difference in perceptions from the 70s to now. Everyone, different ethnicities, everything, with a gollywog doll. Now you have a gollywog doll, and people go, "Oh, racism! Oh my God!" It's hellish. In the 70s, I can honestly say most of us didn't even associate it with being a human being. It was a toy. It was a character. It wasn't, never in my wildest dreams did I think that was supposed to represent the slavery of black people. Never in my wildest dreams. So what we were trying to do was have a discourse and debate, saying, look how words, discussions of politics change your perception from something that back in the day you'd think everyone would have thought was, yeah, well, that's nice, to horror. And so I played my part in that with my ex-wife, and we got attacked by the Conservative Party as being extreme racists, and we were told we're going to be investigated, and then we even had Yasmin Alibi Brown appearing on TV calling for us to be expelled from politics and all the rest of it. And I thought, well, this is all all a bit extreme, but it spiraled to the point where it was actually making news all over the world. And I was interviewed down in London by Rod Liddell and for
Oh,
pieces, and it was extraordinary. And at the end of that, when I got a letter from the Tories saying, "Now, pending investigation, you're suspended," I sent them one back saying, to paraphrase, I thought this was the party of Thatcher and Tebbit, but actually it's the party of Blair. I want no part of it. I left. I was invited then to speak at a UKIP conference about political correctness. Speech went quite well, and I joined and moved on from there, and quite quickly began working under Nigel, doing lots and lots of things to help Nigel in his campaigning, and that allowed me to sort of rise because I was useful to the leadership. So I rose for a couple of years. I was on an upward trajectory due to being quite useful.
well, so it's really because you really because you just started discourse on something that was interesting to talk about, that people allow people to share their views, that just led to, well, where you are now, effectively, which
Well, it is. I think I put a thing in the book about it. It's a little bit like in Star Wars, where Obi-Wan Kenobi's on the bridge and Darth Vader's about to strike him down. He said, "Well, if you strike me down now, I will become more powerful than you could ever imagine." And you know, in a slightly different way, and not perhaps that powerful, but it certainly improved my status by them attacking me. And it turned what was just I was just a local activist, local campaign executive, really very near the bottom of the pile. My profile rose almost overnight to being the point where I could command an audience, even if that audience was people saying that they hated me. At least there was an audience, you know. So you become more prominent.
right. So we've just had the opportunity to hear about your journey from the Conservative Party to UKIP, and really what brought you to UKIP. So I guess you were elected in 2014, in the European parliamentary elections, just in the run up to the 2015 general election, and this was a period when a lot of commentators, a lot of the commentariat really thought that UKIP was going to make a significant breakthrough, at least in the parliamentary elections. And then there was this thought, and a lot of this momentum that UKIP had built up was partly what led to the European Union Referendum Act, and eventually, of course, the Brexit referendum, and the rest is history, as they say. How do you feel about being a candidate during such a momentous period, in the UK's history?
I was excited, really, really excited. I didn't get elected on my first shot, by the way. I'd stood for council 3 times and West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner once before getting elected, and I got elected as an MEP and a local council on the same day, which was
Wow.
quite a shock after having lost repeatedly prior to that. But we felt the momentum was with us. And in my mind, at least, it was always a case that it wasn't about just trying to force us to leave the European Union. I knew that we were forcing the Conservatives into this referendum. And I believe from my heart that without UKIP doing what they did, there wouldn't have been a referendum. But my view was winning a referendum in itself meant very little. I thought that what we had to do was get seats in Parliament, because that's where the real changes are made. Seats in European Parliament, they give you a platform and they give you some media, but they don't mean anything. You can't change anything. Seats on local councils are very useful to build a base from, to challenge, but you must have MPs to make any kind of difference when it comes to real, radical, almost revolutionary change, which is what I wanted. So when it came to that 2015 election, I threw everything, every penny I'd got, every bit of energy I'd got, every activist I could find. We threw everything. I fought a seat in Dudley North, which had been held by Labour. And 2 weeks prior to the election, we saw an opinion poll where Labour was on 37.5% and we were on 37%. And it was extraordinarily exciting. And then, I don't know if you can recall, but the Conservatives put out this story, which I still to this day can't believe affected so many people, but it really did, that the SNP and Labour were going to form a coalition government, and it was vital to stop the SNP. You've got to vote Conservative. Now, I thought in Dudley, in the West Midlands, people aren't going to be that frightened of the SNP, and they're going to be, surely they'd realise that the very last thing on this earth I would do as an MP would be to support anything to do with the SNP. However, we found out over the couple of weeks before the election that we lost a lot of votes to that, and our vote share dropped dramatically. And later, speaking to Nigel, I found out that had happened all over the country, that people had fled from UKIP to the Tories for fear of the SNP. It's a tried and tested Conservative election technique. It's put up a bogeyman. So in that election, it was the SNP. In the last election, it was Jeremy Corbyn. I'm not sure what kind of monster they're going to try and put forward this time to frighten people into voting for them, but it works. And so the feeling of, let me put it this way, when I went to the election count in Dudley North that night, I thought I'd won. And we ended up with 11,500 votes, which I think was about 25%. But we were pushed into third. And that feeling of disappointment was enormous, because I felt a responsibility, because I was sure that Dudley North was probably in the top 5 seats that UKIP should be targeting, even though the party didn't agree with me. But I thought it was, and I thought if I could get in, I could make a real change. So I was devastated by it, to be honest. I put a brave face on it and didn't let anyone see. I was upset, but I was gutted, as the phrase goes. I was convinced we were going to, and I thought, even if I only hold the seat for a year, it will have been not only UKIP winning the seat from Labour, but it would have been a lad from a comprehensive school in the middle of Wolverhampton having come through the ranks to win a seat in Parliament. And I thought that was almost as important, to be honest, because it showed that we did have some kind of democracy. Someone from where I came from could get to Westminster without a big party machine, without the trade unions backing them, just through hard work and having a good group of team support around them. I thought, well, that would show people you could do anything. But unfortunately, I failed on that one. Did my best, but failed.
Gosh, it's quite a story, isn't it? Where, well, I mean, it's a curious matter of sort of election techniques and how everyone else gets caught in the crossfire of it. Of course, I think the Conservatives, were they primarily trying to target UKIP? Not necessarily, but I'm sure it was partly factored into the fact that, they'll get voters to rush away from UKIP. But gosh.
Well, they squeezed our vote quite considerably. And if you think about it, if you're in a close election, you look to squeeze the votes that are closest to you. And people who vote for UKIP are probably more inclined to vote Conservative than people from Labour to swap straight to Conservative. And I know for a fact in the area I was working in, the Conservative Party machine was targeting streets and neighbourhoods that they knew were UKIP and knocking doors repeatedly, hitting that message, because anyone who's been involved heavily in local campaigning knows that you don't campaign town to town, you campaign street to street, door to door, and you build up an understanding of who the people are in those areas. And in fairness, they used my techniques against me because I'd been doing that to them. so they got a local guy in who knew where to go, and they hit us hard. And I was caught on my heels. I didn't react quick enough. That was a mistake on my. I pride myself on being a good local campaigner, but there they caught me napping.
Well, I mean, when it comes to your entire history of campaigning and your experience, evidently you have quite a lot of experience campaigning and winning, too. I guess then the question becomes, well, for you during your experience campaigning, was it fun?
Yes, it was fun. It was exhausting, absolutely exhausting, because we would start preparing, getting our teams together at say 10 in the morning, and we'd keep on going till about 7 o'clock at night, and we wouldn't stop. We'd keep on going. With one story in the book about one of the ladies who worked with us who kept going so long that she fainted, exhaustion setting in. It wasn't unusual to have people with their shoes full of blood from having walked so many miles. And it was a lot of effort went in, but there was good stories and good fun had along the way. And also, we made a point that at the end of every day, everyone would finish at the pub, everyone. And we would sit in the pub and have a laugh and have a few drinks and put our feet up for a bit, because you work hard together, you play hard together, you form more than a team, it's a family. And if you've got that feeling, you'll do anything for each other. And if you're expecting volunteers to go out day in, day out, rain, snow, wind, hail, you name it, keep on going, get a load of abuse, whatever, then you've got to be on side with them and make them feel you're in it with them. So I always try to lead from the front, and particularly I led the drinking in the pub from the front.
And I think that's the most important part when it comes to activists on every level of party where, and Brexit included with the Conservative Party, where a lot of members were quite upset that they'd felt very much left out of the process. The Bruges group at the time did advocate a great deal on this side of things. And gosh, it's quite interesting if we think about activists and politicians and what politicians really ought to do for the people that have been with them, come rain or shine, literally,
Yeah,
night and day. So yeah, I
you've
think
got to show that you're part of it. You
yes.
know, if you're sat there in the office just writing things down on a map or occasionally doing a TV interview, sooner or later people will think, well, hang on a minute, why am I going out for 12 hours a day? Why am I taking time off work? Why am I just being shouted at or bad eggs thrown at me in the street when this bloke sat here, nice and comfortable, having a cup of tea? You know, I don't think it works that way. I think you've got to be out there, right there with them.
Yes, and I've heard stories in the past of and some conservative candidates for offices that they really could have won, and they did win by some margin several years ago. Some who were just simply lazy and have been
Mm.
strongly criticized by their own campaign teams for not having done much. And these are people for various offices who could have done very, very well, and you could have seen in the limelight today, but didn't, partly because they were likely lazy. Um,
Well, it's very tempting when you go into politics to
mm,
focus on the bright lights and the glamour and think, well, I'll skip the muck and dirt and hard work and exhaustion and the rest of it. I'll skip that because there's all the little people who'll do that for me. And I'll just go up there and get on the TV and show everyone how pretty I am. And I think there's a tendency, and I think this is a tendency. I think this is why, by the way, I think the Reform Party are going to have a disastrous election, because they don't understand this. They have senior figures who are just enjoying the limelight rather than actually leading on the streets. And this is where they're going to fall flat on their faces. I absolutely am convinced. We talk about the squeeze. When the squeeze comes at this election, the Tory party will squeeze that reform vote right the way down, because they're not there on the streets. They're not there to counter it face to face. They're in a TV studio somewhere in London. It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
I guess that's losing the essence of what made UKIP a very big campaigning machine. And I guess the follow-up question is, and you spoke a little bit about what reform would do in possibly in the next general election. There's all this talk of reform possibly gaining 10%, 11% of the vote. And I'm guessing you are very, very skeptical of that. Um,
There's no way they're going to get that much. And at this stage of the electoral cycle, they should have been polling between 18 and 22% for the last 6 months. They're an extremely unpopular Conservative government, falling apart in front of everyone's eyes. A Labour Party that it's doing its best to sort of really not say anything. It's not Tony Blair. This isn't a serious machine of a Labour Party. This is Keir Starmer just going around saying to everyone, "Don't talk." That isn't inspiring to anyone. Now, prior to an election, when really people can state their opinion without worrying about who forms a government, parties like UKIP, Reform, etc., should be absolutely smashing it in the polls. And then, as the election draws closer and people's minds focus on who you want actually in government or who you want to stop, then you get squeezed. They're only just into double figures. At this stage, with this Conservative government, it's appalling. And when the campaign starts, and whatever I might say about the Conservatives, they know how to campaign, and they will be putting the pressure on, and they'll know exactly where to hit to get those reform voters back on side. Don't think it'll save them. I don't think it'll stop them losing, but it'll certainly stop reform from winning anything.
Gosh, and I guess you're still a UKIP member. Um,
I am.
so how do you think
Yeah.
UKIP will do in the upcoming election?
Well, UKIP won't take any seats, and UKIP won't come near to taking any seats. But UKIP has a different role. UKIP is something more real than the Reform Party. Uh, UKIP is there as a vehicle to challenge the establishment. And we proved that without winning seats, but by putting huge pressure on, we can change things dramatically. I think there are ideological and political battles to come where UKIP will make a massive impact. And I talk about particularly the effects of legislation and the changes that have gone on during the pandemic and the approaching digitalization of everything and the changes that we see around the world with limits and curtailments of freedom. I see a mission for UKIP there, which one of the things about UKIP is when it's doing well, the party doesn't do well. We start to argue with each other. When we've got a mission that we can all pull behind, there are very few forces that can be as effective as UKIP at engaging in the debate and changing people's minds. It may not result in us winning seats, but we change the dialogue. I think it was Ronald Reagan who said, "It's amazing what you can achieve if you don't mind who takes the credit." And you know, that's my point of
Very
view on
true.
it. You know, I really don't mind who takes the credit as long as we get the change we want.
Gosh, and do you ever think that British politics can be more than a two or three party system?
No, I think that the only way that's ever going to change is if we change the whole electoral system.
Hmm.
Um, I personally, although no system is perfect, but I am in favour of proportional representation and I believe in open primaries because the big problem we've got at the moment is, all right, yeah, there are safe seats where you could put anyone in, put a badge on them, they're in. And under proportional representation, you could still have the same thing where you have the top sort of 40 or 50 candidates who party thinks are good chaps who've been to the right schools or who've been in the right trades union or whatever. But if you engage in open primaries, a little bit like the Americans, you let the people have a say. And I think that's what's missing from our system. The people have no say whatsoever. And we've still got a system that was designed for when people had no idea what was going on in the world. So we'd elect someone who'd ride off on a horse to go down to London to make our decisions for us. Those days are gone. We are a bit more informed nowadays. And I think we should have people who are directly answerable to us. And let me just add as well, one of my hobby horses, I think the House of Lords should be abolished and replaced by an elected second chamber without any question of a doubt. I mean, it's the ultimate cronyism. No place in a modern society or a modern democracy. So all those changes on my wish list, they would make a difference. But you know what? They're probably not going to happen because people in charge benefit greatly from that system and turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
Agreed. And I guess that it'll be interesting to see what the next general election comes. And for you, do you intend to go back into elected politics or elected office or?
I intend to play a more full role within politics, yeah. I'd spent some time retired and intending to stay retired. And then world events, things have changed. I mean, we've got wars, we've got changes to society, we've got changes to the economy. I thought that the biggest thing that would ever happen in my lifetime was the EU referendum. It now pales into insignificance compared to the things that are going on now and the changes happening in the world. So I think almost reluctantly, uh, but I think I've got some energy and some experience, and I'm going to make use of it. And it may not make any difference, but I'm going to try because I couldn't sleep at night if I didn't try.
And I guess last but not least, if you look back at your book and really your book is quite a story and it's an illustration of who you were and who you grew up to be. Do you think that a 5-year-old or primary school Bill Etheridge would ever imagine that you'd reach the heights you have right now?
No, no. When I was at primary school, I either wanted to be a paleontologist or a journalist. But I unfortunately was nowhere near academically good enough to be either of those things. So I would never have dreamt of living the life that I've led. And there are many things in the book, as you rightly said at the start, that sort of don't reflect all that well on me. But you know, I would have thought I'd have made some better decisions along the way as well. I wouldn't have expected to drop myself in it quite so often. But the main thing is, I would have expected, and the one thing I have lived up to, is to be straightforward and honest and open. So that's the only thing I can say that I've lived up to. The rest of it, you know, I was supposed to be opening the bowling for England at cricket and all sorts of things. It just didn't happen.
And I guess instead of becoming a journalist, you became the subject of journalists' interest, which maybe is arguably
Well,
better.
well, I sold some newspapers. It just wasn't writing the stories.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, Bill Etheridge, it's been a great experience reading your book. We look forward to seeing it go on to the next stages. And it's been a great experience speaking to you. So thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And well, have a good day.
And you. Cheers.
Cheers.